In Iowa, small business owner Deidre DeGier is facing off against Iowa's current governor, Republican Kim Reynolds. Deidre joins me now from Des Moines, Iowa. Deidre, glad to have you on Roland Martin Unfiltered. Um, Already, your opponent is trying to say you are a boogie woman. You're going to be sitting here defunding the police, trying to tag you with race. They put together a commercial that features Congresswoman Cori Bush, which I don't understand. She's in Missouri. She's a member of Congress, and you're running for statewide office in Iowa.
Yeah, the one, thank you, Roland, for having me on this show. I have been always been a great admirer of you when I was even a broadcast news student in the year of 2004, which was a very, very important year between 2004 and 2008. And so I'm really grateful to be on this show. But you're right. My opponent released an ad the latter part of last week. And when I initially saw the ad, the ad has her sitting at a coffee table with a TV in the background with a black woman. And I originally thought, oh, she found a Deidre lookalike. And the closer I looked, it was actually a news story that Congresswoman Bush had been featured in, talking about the subject of defund the police. And then the ad followed with scenes that were of riots that did not take place in the state of Iowa. And she went on to talk about somewhat of an imaginative story of what's happening in the state. And it's unfortunate, but I'll tell you what it is in all honesty. This is truly a figment of her imagination as it relates to this ad, because she's not focused on Iowans right now. Nothing about that ad was about Iowa. And the fact that she had to go and find B-roll from another congresswoman in the state that wasn't Iowa was just unfortunate. But just yet another example of why we got to get rid of leadership like that.
It's interesting when we see how these things are playing out. The Republican Party, they are absolutely trying to push the buttons of race, and that's what that was all about.
Hmm.
Featuring a black congresswoman from Missouri, then showing riots. What they're trying to say is, oh, vote for me, the white woman, because this black woman, she's scary.
Hmm. Yeah. And the fortunate part that I have is that I'm running in a state like Iowa. And I know that we're about more than 90% white, but over time this state has been able to really rise above the fray. I call us the Petri dish of progress, despite the numbers that we have as it relates to communities of color. This state has always tried to be progressive and move us forward. And I often like to tell people about what happened in the state of Iowa nearly 100 years before Brown versus Board of Education. Our state desegregated schools for a little 12-year-old black girl that was in rural Muscatine County in the state of Iowa. Her father was an attorney, and he was homeschooling her and realized that she was going to get a shot. She needed to go to public school. And it was at that point in time that Iowa made a decision that no matter your race, no matter your gender, every kid in the state should have access to a strong quality public education system, which is true to who we are. We've been number one in the past. And what's firing Iowans up right now is that we're 18, 19 on the list. And it's because we have a governor right now who's defunding our systems. And so rather than talking about her record, she then, instead of talking about her record, she wants to talk about defunding the police. She wants to talk about Congresswoman Bush. And that's not the play right now. And Iowans aren't going to accept it. I didn't even really have to say a whole lot about it. Roland, Iowans stood up and talked about how saddened they were, how disgusted they were, that that's where she wants to take things. She's insistent on driving wedges between people, including two black women, states apart.
When it comes to, obviously, Iowa is an overwhelmingly white state.
Hmm.
What has been the reaction to your candidacy? I mean, here is someone also who is very conservative. You look at the state Supreme Court there as well. And, Iowa used to be, some consider it to be a purple state where you had Democrats and Republicans, depending upon what election year. But it has gotten increasingly red over the last several years.
It's gotten increasingly red over the last several years. That's a true statement, but we're not done yet. The fact that we were purple meant that we would swing from one side to the other, and we're swinging. We're kind of stuck on the other side right now with our current leadership. But Iowans are waking up to the fact that she is an extreme. The people who are receiving me across the state aren't just Democrats; they're independents. they're Republicans. And you want to know the issues that they want to talk about? They want to talk about education and they want to talk about choice. You know, they're upset with the fact that our governor wants a 6-week abortion ban in the state. They're upset that more than 90% of our students are enrolled in public schools. And over the last 4 years, she's only given our education budget on average a 1.9% increase. You know, she decided at the end of session last year that she wanted to take $55 million of taxpayer money to fund the private tuition of 2% of our students rather than fix the whole system that is in dire need of investment. She is clearly out of touch. And the reason why I say that is because she is in alignment with so many of these extreme measures that are coming across extremist Republicans' desks. And the common sense Republicans in our state are standing back from that. That bill that I told you about, 28 Republicans who have been in lockstep with her the entire session said, we're not voting on that. We're not saying yes to that. And many of them were up for re-election, or many of them were up for retirement, but about half of them were up for re-election. And this governor, because they stood out and stood up for their communities, decided to get people to primary those folks who stood up for what was right, and she helped them raise money. And those Republicans are no longer in office. So she's being divisive, not just amongst Democrats. She's being divisive amongst her own party folks.
Questions from the panel. First off, Larry.
Yeah, so you highlighted some really important points regarding Iowa and education. And I wanted to talk about, you talk about the state is, extremely rural. How are you getting that message out about, you talked about education and where Iowa was and where it is now. How are you getting that message out on, like boots on the ground? How are you in terms of travel, in terms of volunteers? Talk about that a little bit.
That's a good question. So I have a little uniqueness about me. I'm originally from Jackson, Mississippi, as city as it gets, right, in the state of Mississippi. My great-grandmother, they were sharecroppers. And I moved to the state of Oklahoma when I was about 11, 12 years old. And many people know Tulsa, the scene of Black Wall Street. That's where I went to high school. And so I made my way to Iowa and met a man from Oklahoma who came from a cattle ranching family. And so I'm able to connect with rural Iowans in a way that particular Democratic candidates have not on a statewide level because they have typically been urban candidates. While I live in urban Iowa, I am insistent on meeting people where they are. And I learned that from the 2012 Obama campaign. I was the African-American vote director for the president that year. And folks thought we had turnout that was great in 2008 amongst Blacks, but we showed up in 2012. And that is not just amongst the Black community. When we know we show up to people's doors and connect with communities all over this state, we see real change happen and we see interest in our candidates. That's what makes us purple. But the fact of the matter is we have to do the outreach to make sure that that's happening. When she won in 2018, she only won with 50.3% of the vote. 37,000 votes was the difference. And that was in a year when less than 30% of communities of color showed up. That was in a year where we had less than half of our 18 to 34-year-old Democrats show up. And so our message has been very spot on since the beginning of this campaign. We have to connect with people and meet people where they are and let them know that they're not alone in this journey and that there's something we can do about it. Because the other side is spending their money to make people think that they're unbeatable. But when you only win by 37,000 votes in a gubernatorial cycle, you're not unbeatable. We just need to work harder.
Randy.
I'm very curious to see how people have responded to you and what you have to do to ensure that people know that we're not monolithic. It seems as if they have tried to group you and say all people or all Black women think this way. And so how have you ensured that they know that you think differently and that you have your own message and your own plan and your own platform?
Right. So when we think about the issue of defund the police, and when I talk to some of our young people on the subject matter, I ask them the why, right? That tactic is a route to get to some sort of solution. And when I ask them the why, they want their communities to be safe. They don't want to see the consistent cycles of recidivism happening in their communities. They want to make sure that people are economically sustainable. And so those are the topics that we talk about throughout this campaign, because we've got the basics back right in our state. We have never, ever elected a Black female governor in this country, ever. I come from a lineage of women who have been problem solvers, who have been forced to have to bring people together to achieve the goals that they want to achieve. And these women in my life have not had the privilege to decide who they would and would not work with, who they would and would not go in front of, right? For the sake of the better good. That is what democracy looks like. And so what I'm insinuating with folks across the state, I know you're giving up. I know you're tired. I know you don't want to see these tragedies happen in your community anymore. But what I'm insisting upon is that we not give up on democracy. And if there is going to be any type of woman that is going to defend democracy any day out of the week, it's the group of women that I come from, Black women, who understand what it means to work with people, who understands what it means to be inclusive in our thought. We no longer have to settle for these policies that rob Peter to pay Paul. We've got to make sure Paul is good, Peter is good, and Paul is good. Because what's happened in my state is that they'll go and create policies for a very small group of people. And then they'll go to the press and they'll brag about it. And they say, look at what we've done. We helped this group of people. Meanwhile, the rest of folks are looking like, what about us? What are you going to do for us? Well, that's because policies are not being created by people that care about all of us. As a Black woman, I am ensuring that that is going to happen because I know whether we like it or not, we need each other. Republicans, Democrats, Blacks, white, we need each other. And over these last 24 months through COVID, we've learned that we can come up with some good solutions collectively and sustainable solutions at that. So we might as well get back to doing what we know works versus just trying to pit people against one another, because that's a sport. That is not a strategy.
Mustafa.
Well, all I can say is if I was living in Iowa, you would get my vote.
No, I appreciate that.
And that's just real talk, because I followed your candidacy for a little while. I've spent quite a bit of time in Iowa, and I know that when it comes to those in rural areas who are now dealing with the flooding, and we've seen some extreme flooding that has happened there in Iowa, and then also the extreme temperatures in the summertime are impacting, many of the agricultural practices. Do you see an opportunity to bring together both the rural and urban communities and with a pathway forward that is one that helps all of them?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And honestly, that's the work that we're doing right now. The issues that we're talking about are not Republican, Democratic issues. And unfortunately, our rural communities are feeling it quicker than our urban communities. I live in an urban community and we have corporations and nonprofits. And when our schools aren't doing well, when people are hungry, we've got the safety nets. Our rural communities, they've used most of their safety nets. They've been making do with what they have. They've been resilient, and they've been left behind by both Republicans and Democrats. And when I'm talking to them about funding their schools, it means something to them because their schools are closing. Their kids are graduating from high school vowing never to come back. Why? Because of the lack of economic vitality that exists in those communities. Our state is short 50,000 workforce units today. 50,000. And that is disproportionately impacting our urban communities, specifically communities of color, and it's also disproportionately impacting our rural communities. And so we have to do a much, much better job of showing up for those folks by making sure that our policies are inclusive, and they're receiving me. My first overflow crowd was in rural Audubon County, and some of you all might have remembered Congressman Steve King. That was in his old district. They're hungry. They're hungry, folks. And, I know that we talk a lot about hope and things along those lines, but right now it's really about the hard work of the everyday Iowa Democrat that's shown itself to be tested at every opportunity. And now we have another big test ahead of us. And I'm excited to see what comes of it.
All right, then, Deidre DeJear. First of all, if people want to support your campaign, where do they go?
They can go to DeJearForIowa.com. I am on all of the socials as well. Something special is happening in this state, and I just want people to know about it. And I want to remind folks what happened in 2007. There was this outstanding question out there about who should be the next president of the United States. And Iowa raised this little bitty hand and said, Barack Obama. And here's the kicker of it all. The rest of the country listened to us. So we know who we are. And we're going to remind the country of who we are once again with this candidacy.
All right, then. Deidre, we surely appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for having me.